Cool. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you all for attending. I'm really excited to be here today. Before we dive in, maybe as a quick introduction, I'm actually also a former ETH student. I did my PhD here, and then afterwards a postdoc, and I also did a certificate in advanced studies in information security. So I know this room very, very well, but I know it from your side, where you are sitting at the moment. So it's really cool to be back. What I do at the moment is I lead at Deloitte Switzerland within our cyber team. I lead a team called Resilience, and basically what we do is we help clients to prepare for and to respond and recover from cyber incidents or more generally disruptions in general. So I'm not alone. Judith will also we'll do this together. So Judith, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Judith. I'm actually with Deloitte for 4 years. I'm a manager in Frank's team, and on my project I actually mainly supporting the clients. I'm setting up their enterprise recovery capabilities, or also to improve them, and we will see that at the later stage on a little case study how we are actually supporting the clients.
Cool. So today our talk will be structured in roughly 3 parts. So we will start by explaining what is ransomware. We'll probably be very brief about that because I assume that most of you will be very familiar with that. And we'll focus on the second part of the question, why is it actually a challenge for organizations? We'll then move over to looking at what actually happens when an organization is hit by ransomware. You've probably seen some of the large-scale cases. Comparis, a couple of weeks ago in summer, in spring, there was this Colonial Pipeline in the US that had in the US a very significant effect. So we'll look at what actually happens. And then the last part will be talking about what can organizations actually do to recover from ransomware. So this is what we will do, and this is supposed to be interactive. If you've got questions, just signal. We are happy to take questions. And in the spirit of being interactive, we would actually like to start with a small quiz. I know when I was a student, I used to hate that. You don't need to say anything, you can just signal. We've got 3 multiple choice questions for you to warm you up. If you look at cybercrime in general, how large would you estimate the global annual revenue from cybercrime in 2020? Would you estimate it to be above 100 million? Would you estimate it to be above 1 billion? Or would you estimate it to be above $1 trillion US? So who's for A? No hand for A. Who's for B? Okay, quite a few number for B. Who's for C? Okay, fewer for C. The answer actually is C. So the global revenue, so this is not the profits of cyber criminals, but the revenue made with cybercrime in 2020 was estimated to be $1.5 trillion US. That's a huge number. It's bigger than the GDP of Spain or Russia or some of the actually quite big nations. Now, moving on, ransomware gangs, you've probably heard of that. Much of the ransomware is actually done by cybercrime groups. They are called ransomware gangs. Some of them are really successful. How would you estimate the revenue that they make in a year around? Around $1 million US, around 10, or around 100 or above 100 million? What do you think? Who's for A? One hand for A. Who's for B? A few hands for B. Who's for C? Okay, C is the clear winner, yes. So just to give an example, there's this group that attacked Colonial Pipeline. They're called DarkSide. And in the span of less than a year, they even made around 90 million US dollars. And you can trace it. It's the Bitcoin payments that go to that group that is used as a proxy. So those organizations, they make a significant amount of money. And I think you start to see the pattern regarding our multiple choice questions. Last question. If you look at the estimated average cost that an organization has when they are hit by a ransomware attack, how would you estimate that? Would you think it's 500K? Do you think it's 1 million? Or do you think it's 2 million? So who's for A? Okay, no hands for A. I think you got the pattern. Who's for B? A few hands for B. Who's for C? It's 2 million. And so on average, I think it was Sophos. They did a study, and in 2020 was on average 1.85 million. What's noteworthy is this is on average, so there are companies that have significantly more in terms of cost, and the number is rising because the ransoms are rising, and it's just getting more from year to year. Yeah, there's a question.
So how much of that 2 million is the ransom, and how much is preparing new infrastructure?
So covering the cost of recovery is significantly higher typically. Because most organizations, they have this, we'll get to it in a second, but they have an immediate cost where they just need to respond, the incident response. Then typically they realize that they need to trigger an improvement program afterwards, which is really, really expensive. And the ransom is of course, it's not insignificant, but if you compare it to the cost of recovery, the ransom is a smaller amount. Cool. So I hope that got you interested. Let's jump into the topic. And yeah, let's start with the first question.
So actually, just to give you a short introduction that we all talk about the same. Quick definition, what is ransomware? So we say it's a type of a malware which cyber criminals use to attack organizations so that they can encrypt the systems and ask for a ransom, usually ask for in cryptocurrency. So just that you know what we are talking about when we say ransomware. Most of the organizations actually, they underestimate the risks to be a target, or they also underestimate what it means if you are a victim of a successful ransomware. To give you some more facts, you can see on the first one, so each 11 seconds, a new organization gets attacked by a ransomware. Then if this attack has been successful, the damage could be immense. So it's very destructive, and it takes you almost 290 days in average to recover from it. Then within 10 minutes, this ransomware could spread across the whole organization, have a global impact. And because our world is so complex and the organizations as well as systems are so interconnected, even though you are not the main target, you could suffer a lot because you are attacked, because of a side effect from another, from your dependency from another third party. And therefore, actually, we recommend organizations to increase or invest in their enterprise recovery capabilities, as I said, that they can recover or they can prepare for, as well as respond, and from these destructive cyber attacks. So they're not, when it happens, they're like, okay, what do we do? That's our business.
Cool. So, and you might wonder, why is ransomware actually such a big issue? From my perspective, it's one of the greatest cyber threats to organizations at the moment. And from my perspective, there are two reasons for it. The first reason is organizations are really, really badly prepared. That's the first reason. And the second reason is that the attackers, they are extremely sophisticated. It's a business model. They earn money with that. And they, just like any other organization, they optimize their model to increase the amount of revenue, to increase the amount of profit that they make. And that's a circle that has accelerated, so-called extreme loss of technology scenarios, where a company is hit by ransomware and they lose all of their IT. They're increasingly common. And you read about it in the news quite often these days, but the actual cases that happen, they are much more frequent than what you read in the news. It's the tip of the iceberg, what you read. And I just wanted to cover, before we go on, 2-3 interesting facts about ransomware. So attackers, they increasingly use something called access brokers. So very often they don't hack organizations themselves anymore, but they use access brokers, criminals that get paid to provide access into organizations. So they use that to gain an initial foothold into an organization. They also are by by now there's a number of toolkits for ransomware, and some of them, they are not detectable by the typical anti-malware agents that organizations in the commercial space that they have deployed. And very often, the attackers, they're good at what they do. So once they are within a victim's network, within their environment, they use techniques to hide their tracks, to hide that they are in there, and sometimes they are very, very difficult to detect. And that makes it quite hard to defend against ransomware.
So what is also quite interesting, actually, that ransomware is a lucrative business model. So the attackers or the cyber criminals have professionalized the business as well as commercialized it. You can actually go to the darknet and kind of buy it as you would buy clothes on Zalando. So you can buy it off the shelf. Then you have these cyber criminals who are, for you doing what you have bought. So it's kind of your ready-made toolkit you get, and they will kind of, for you to try to, attack this organization or get into that organization. So you don't need to understand anymore what actually it means to attack an organization. You can just buy it and say, please do it for me. So this opens up actually for everyone. And on the other side, they also increase the pressure, so to become more or ask for more ransom. So they combine ransomware with another malware or with a DDoS attack, as well as they intentionally destroy backups so that you're not able to recover anymore. And also they publish now the data, or they publish the data, so everybody can see it. And also they try to find in the supply chain which is actually the weak point where we can, with one attack, it has an effect to a large number of victims. So it gets more and more aggressive and hostile. Yeah.
So there's one case which I personally found extremely sad. It's a case in Finland where a company that operates a number of facilities for mental health, they got hacked by ransomware, and the attackers, they actually threatened to release the patient's files. And when the organization when they said we're not going to pay the ransom, they actually went to individual patients and said, look, if you don't pay a smaller ransom, we will publish your file on the darknet. And that's, for me, I think that's a very extremely unethical and very, very sad case. It's an extreme example, but it just shows what these groups do.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot. It's again my slide. So we quickly explain to you how it actually works. So what is a ransomware doing in the background? So as a first start, actually, attackers send a phishing email to an organization, and someone in that organization is actually clicking on the malicious link. Even though everybody's saying or thinking maybe, is this really a realistic scenario? Yes, it is. 80% of the successful ransomware attacks starts like this. So on that infected computer, the ransomware, or they try to go to the command and control center and, control from there, as well as try to spread across the whole organization in the background so that they can steal data, as I said, also destroy backups, but they try to be hidden so that you don't detect it like after a minute, and that's the biggest fear the people we had done a survey said to us, so that they detect a ransom after 3 months, and it's already there for 3 months. And after they have stolen enough data or they get what they wanted, they will encrypt all the system, contact the organization, and ask for the ransom.
Yes, once this malware is already inside the organization network, does it have any communication with the with the cyber criminals, or is it operating fully remotely?
It depends on the malware. So in some cases, in most cases, I would say it's completely orchestrated. So the attackers, they have dashboards. They can see how many devices they have infected. That's also what they use to make a decision when do they actually go from stealth to that they show the ransomware display. The point is, this can go very, very quickly. We will see that. So in some cases, if the attackers really do stuff like disable backups, destroy backups, that takes time. But in other cases, we've seen the whole sequence taking a few minutes until an entire organization is wiped out. I've got an example in 2 slides, but it's very sophisticated. Yeah.
You could potentially try to detect those malware and this malware software by tracking network communication between the intranet and the internet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you can, to some extent, you can detect. I mean, there are tools, for example, the latest and greatest in terms of attacking is attackers trying to disable your backups. So typically backups are some form of, you've got a central storage, and the patterns of communication that you have between your clients and servers to the backup, they are very unique. They are the same. They are periodic. You do backups every day. There's a schedule behind it. So the patterns are known. And there are certain tools that now allow you, for example, to look for anomalies. Do you see if someone is attacking? That gives you sort of indications of how you can protect the backups. But it's an arms race. So attackers get smarter, defenders get smarter. Yeah. You had another question.
I guess.
I just acoustically didn't.
Because she asked what are the other 20% when it's not the 80%, which I say it's kind of a realistic scenario that's phishing.
So what you need to know is this is one scenario. This is one vector. And usually attackers go by the easiest way they can go. And at the moment, the easiest way really is tricking a person into doing something that lets you as an attacker exploit a vulnerability. Now, there are also other ways of how you can exploit the vulnerability. If you find a problem in a web app, a weakness that you exploit. But typically, that's far more difficult than just sending out a targeted phishing email. And that's why 80% of the attacks, they just go through the human channel. So if you ask me for what is the top recommendation, awareness. So that alone doesn't help. But if you've got one thing that you can start with awareness. Cool. So now, what does it actually mean when an organization is hit? Cyber attacks, they are extremely common. So you've got ransomware, but there's also loads of other cyber attacks happening. And for each and every cyber attack, an organization has basically 4 things they can do. They can try to prevent the attack. They can try to detect the attack. They can try to respond and recover from it when they are hit. And they can try to insure against it. So let's take the insurance out. If you look at the first 3 things you can do, you can prevent, detect, and respond and recover. Most of the organizations in the last couple of years, when they invested in cybersecurity, they focused on either preventing or detecting. And they've spent most of their money in terms of what they did in terms of improvements on these 2 pillars. But if the attacker is more and more sophisticated, there are certain attackers, really well-organized crime groups or nation states, you cannot prevent, or you in some cases cannot detect attacks coming from them. So in fact, if you look at public opinion, most people, they actually now, if an organization is hit by a cyber attack, they don't perceive it as something bad because it happens to everyone. What is seen as bad in the media or in public opinion is if you as an organization are hit and you fail to respond and recover in a smart way. Because this is something you can prepare beforehand. And it's actually, if you look at these 4 pillars, if you look at preventing and detecting, that's far more expensive than preparing how you would recover, because that is to a large extent, of course, you have some expenses for certain tools or certain spare hardware, for example, that also costs money. But a lot of the recovery and the responding is actually thinking about how you would do it and making plans. And there's really not much of an excuse for not doing that. So that's sort of a paradox. Most organizations, even organizations that spend a lot of money on cybersecurity, they focus on really trying to detect and trying to prevent, but they forget that actually, no matter if they spend millions on that, they may still become a victim. And then what really matters is that you've got plans of how you respond and recover. And that's also what we want to focus on today. Not preventing, but really on how you respond and recover. But now let's go back to what happens and what is the impact. So the obvious impact is the service disruption. So your service is no longer available, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. Very often that then leads to reputational damage. In certain sectors, the financial sector in Switzerland is a very strong sector that very quickly leads to regulatory fines and sanctions. It leads, obviously, if your service is not available, it leads to financial losses if you can't make business. If a company is down for 10 days, you don't make business in 10 days, you lose money. And very often you have expenditures for that time. So it's actually a cost. And then there's a whole list of other obvious and less obvious impacts that happens. There have been quite a few cases of organizations that have been hit severely. There are a number of organizations that actually went bankrupt because of cyber attacks. So it's nothing to joke about. If you are hit with a scenario where you really lose all of your IT within a very short amount of time, that can be an extremely serious situation for an organization. So just to give you a little bit of an example, this shows you how a timeline of attacks looks like. And I wanted to basically cover 2 messages on that slide. So if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, so this here is the point where you, as an organization, actually detect the attack. To the left of that is basically the time in this example, and it's a real example. We anonymized it. It's from one of our clients, which was a global company. It took 90 minutes from the point of the first infection in their network to every endpoint running on Windows being infected. And we are talking about 60,000 endpoints. That's a huge number of devices. So 3 seconds it took the attackers to compromise the first device. 15 seconds, the compromise started in a location. And in that location, they had 3,000 devices. It took 15 seconds for those devices to all be compromised. 7 minutes was, because it was, a modern company, everything was networked. It took 7 minutes to reach the headquarters from the location. And within 90 minutes, every device in the organization, or almost every device in the organization, was infected. So that's a case of something going really, really quickly. In other cases, the attackers, they stay stealthy, they wait. That's an example where things went really, really quickly. And as a result, basically for that company, 60,000 endpoints, that's probably 60,000 employees, they were left without IT. It's a massive worst-case scenario. Now, to the right-hand side of that, I wanted to show how does a recovery proceed. Recovery, typically, when we help clients on such engagements, we see that they have 3 stages. The first is, really, the first stage, you try to find out in the incident what happened, and you try to contain the damage as a second stage. And then the actual recovery takes much longer. Very often that takes a year or 2 until you get back to the real business that you had beforehand. Now that's a very severe scenario. Now let's move on to how can you actually prepare to recover from that.
Actually, we wanted to do a mentor with you, but we realized that maybe you don't have the, mobile phone, network here. But so we could also, if you don't, I guess, we could also do it just shout. So we would like to ask you, as you have heard, what ransomware is and what it can cause. How would you prepare yourself? So imagine you're in an organization, you could ask, so what would you do? You can just shout in the ideas you have.
Or any thoughts? I mean, we need to switch, right?
Or if the Menti works, but I'm not sure if it works. Does it work?
Also for time, I mean, if you can also say something, shout. Do you have any? Yeah.
Establish a channel of backup communication so it can make.
That's also very important. If you lose all of your IT, you typically use technology, and then you've got people that can't communicate. You don't have email that works anymore. You don't have Teams or Skype. Yeah, that's a good point. So typically what we find from our experience, when we see organizations that are hit, typically they, after they are hit, they would have wanted to have prepared 5 things better. And the first is really what you mentioned, organizational readiness and alignment, so that you've got the structures in place, who makes which decision, that you've got the teams in place. And what's really important is that these teams, they are cross-functional, so that you don't just have IT people in there, but you have business people in there. Because when you are hit as an organization, you are losing business, and IT typically doesn't know, for example, from a business perspective, what service do we need to recover first? Where do we lose most money? But in such a situation, they need to know. Second pillar is that you know prioritize recovery planning. So when you lose all of your IT, you can't just restore it at once. So you need to have a plan. What do you restore first? And as a business, you want to typically restore things first that you need the most. So, for example, as a bank, it could be that you want to get your core banking system up again first, so that you have that running. But this is not something you decide when you are in a crisis, when you are hit by that. So you need to make a plan before, and you also need to identify what are certain dependencies. Because if you restore an isolated system, then you discover, oh, I need something else as well. This needs to be pre-planned. Then you can prepare certain building blocks for recovery. So you explained a good example. For example, communication infrastructure, or that you've got certain things ready. And then very often, in reality, you don't have the capacity as an organization to do it all by yourself. So, example from a real client, they had a case, they had 5,000 clients, they had a super automated system to restore clients, but the bandwidth of that system was 50 clients a day. So imagine 5,000 divided by 50. That's quite a few days to get that back. So you need to think about how can you accelerate that. And the last but not least is effective crisis communication, which is something that many organizations are really bad at. Is you can prepare templates of how you communicate with the public. You can make strategies. Even the question is, do I pay ransoms or do I not as an organization? You don't want to be debating that when the situation hits. This is the discussion you can have beforehand. Cool. Now let's walk through a real example.
Yeah, so I like to kind of walk you through a high-level example of what we did. So we were we supported a global insurance company along these 5 pillars. And so the first step, what we did was actually really mapping out their business services and asking them which one are the critical ones. So as Frank explained, I mean, you need to really think of what is key, what is core, what needs to be alive when everything is down, or what needs to be up alive when everything is down. So we kind of defined the critical business services as well as the priority of recovery. Then if you have the critical business services, you need to know your foundational IT. So you need to map all the IT systems you need to make use of this or to keep them running. So we had then to map the IT systems to the critical business services. Then you need to have technical and non-technical plans in place. I mean, when you know the critical business services, you also need to know what needs to be brought back at which sequence or with which sequence, as well as which steps. So it's really a plan. You do step 1, step 2, step 3, and you just follow that plan. Because when you are in a hurry, it's really good to have a plan which you can follow. And then you also need to check, even if I have the tools and materials, as Frank already explained, for example, backups, but you need to check if the backups are not connected to the system. So if the system is down, the backup is also down. So you need to ensure that. So we checked that and made a plan for that, And then burst capacity, you also then need to do kind of a calculation how much resources I need in reality to keep it or to bring the systems back, as well as the critical business services, as fast as possible. And then effective crisis communication. So we were writing statements as well as, for example, press statements, because when you're if it's real, you don't want to go to legal and say, like, is this legally approved? Can I give this press statement? Can I publish it? So this you need to have beforehand. And then the last one, I guess that's kind of the most important one, testing, exercising. So the key roles, as well as the system, the plans, test them, or we tested them so that you discover new gaps, uncertainties, as well as that the people feel comfortable. So they already have practices once, or more, actually, so they know what they do. It's not that if it's real the first time and they're like, okay, let's go with this plan. Let's see if the plan works.
Cool. So, to wrap up, I hope you found this interesting. I will not go through the key takeaways. I think we've covered the key messages in the conversation. It's a really, really exciting topic. I hope you found our talk interesting. There's one thing I just wanted to briefly mention. If you are interested in this, and if you are a student at ETH, no matter at what level, if you are a bachelor student, master student, if you are a PhD student, consider joining our We Are Cyber network. As a student, I personally didn't know that Deloitte is actually the biggest cyber consultancy globally. We've got over 17,000 cyber consultants on a global level. Our Swiss team is growing as well. If you are interested in the topic, consider joining our We Are Cyber network. What we basically do there is we regularly have cyber events where you can look behind the scenes. You can talk to our specialists, people like Judith and myself, and you can also network with peers that are also interested in that. So have a look at that if you are interested. And of course, if you're graduating or looking for internships, our contact details are there. We are recruiting. We are really, really growing in Switzerland. So drop us an email if you'd like to find out more about that. Cool. Any questions?
Yeah, is there some correlation between the size of a company and the likelihood of being attacked?
Did you say size?
The size of the company, sorry.
I did not understand. Yeah.
And the attacks?
The likelihood of the attack, yeah.
No. So small companies, typically the maturity in terms of IT security of small companies is lower. There are exceptions, but large companies are also hit. I don't think there is a correlation. Yeah.
Regarding the example you gave about the company that caused that attack, when exactly did it happen, time-wise? Last year, like when?
That is a very prominent case. I think it was on the first day even. So we have a service to support organizations with incident response. Sometimes we are triggered as part of that. So when they have a major incident that they cannot handle with themselves, they will call us, and then we've got teams ready to dispatch. In that particular case, the example that I mentioned, it was really through management connections. They lost all of their IT, and they needed to find a solution, and then there was a personal connection between two people. And they talked on the first day, and we were boots on the ground on the second day. And that was a major engagement for us. Yeah.
Do companies usually pay ransoms or not?
Retail banking?
No, if they pay ransom or not.
So the typical recommendation is not to pay the ransom, because if you pay the ransom, you basically fuel the system. If you look at the ransoms over the last 2-3 years, they've doubled or tripled every single year. If you, as an organization, if you've lost your data and your backups are corrupt, you still have to make a decision. Okay, what do I do? I mean, so of course the recommendation is don't pay, but in some cases you have no choice. So that's an evaluation that you need to make as an organization. What's important in the financial sector, since most of these payments they go through Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrencies, banks, they have certain rules and regulations that they need to follow with regards to money laundering, cybercrime financing, terrorism laws. So in some cases, they've got legal restrictions why they, for example, they are in breach of some regulations that they have to fulfill. So especially if you're in the financial sector as an organization, you have to think ahead really, really clearly before, okay, what am I allowed? How do I need to justify it? So this is not something you want to decide when it hits you.
Can we even trust the attackers? Like, were there cases where people paid the ransom but their data was not given back to them?
Oh, that's actually quite common, that you pay and then you get a key that doesn't work, or you get only half of the data. Yeah, that's quite common, which is even more of a reason why you need to be prepared.
Thank you very much for this very interesting and engaging talk. We have a little something for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And something for your sweet tooth.
Oh, that's
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thanks for attending. Danke.